how you can say that is not gain of function.
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this
it
because you're trying to obscure responsibility.
Impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
Whether you call that gain of function, whether you don't call that gain of function, we shouldn't have been funding this institute in the first place. Yesterday, there was this big exchange between Rand Paul and Anthony Fauci. The left has declared that Anthony Fauci won this exchange, and the right has declared that Rand Paul won this exchange. The entire exchange is over the question of whether the National Institutes of Health funded research in Wuhan that could have led to the creation of the COVID-19 virus. It is unclear at this point whether that is true or not. What is true is that the United States, via the NIH, funded a place called EcoHealth Alliance, which then gave a grant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They were supposed to pledge not to engage in gain-of-function research. But the question is, what is gain-of-function research? So there are a couple of different definitions of gain-of-function research that have been utilized. One particular definition suggests that gain-of-function research is a gain-of-function within viruses that already apply to humans. Another definition of gain-of-function research is a gain-of-function for an animal virus that now is made transmissible to humans. That's what this really comes down to, is a little bit of semantic wordplay here. Now, we still don't know that this came from a lab leak, right? It is very likely at this point that it came from a lab leak, but we still don't know. And we don't know exactly how that virus was developed. So a lot of this is speculative. However, it is certainly worth questioning whether the United States scientific community should have been paying the Wuhan Institute of Virology at all, considering that we have no way of actually seeing what it is that they are doing. So here's Rand Paul and Anthony Fauci going at it yesterday.
Dr. Fauci, as you are aware, it is a crime to lie to Congress. Section 1001 of the U.S. Criminal Code creates a felony and a 5-year penalty for lying to Congress. On your last trip to our committee on May 11th, you stated that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And yet, gain-of-function research was done entirely in the Wuhan Institute by Dr. Shi and was funded by the NIH. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the Wuhan virology paper entitled Discovery of a Rich Gene Pool of Bat SARS-Related Coronaviruses. Please deliver a copy of the journal article to Dr. Fauci. In this paper, Dr. Shi credits the NIH and lists the actual number of the grant that she was given by the NIH. In this paper, she took 2 bat coronavirus genes, spike genes, and combined them with a SARS-related backbone to create new viruses that are not found in nature. These lab-created viruses were then shown to replicate in humans. These experiments combined genetic information from different coronaviruses that infect animals but not humans to create novel artificial viruses able to infect human cells. Viruses that in nature only infect animals were manipulated in the Wuhan lab to gain the function of infecting humans. This research fits the definition of the research that the NIH said was subject to the pause in 2014 to 2017, a pause in funding on gain of function. But the NIH failed to recognize this, defines it away, and it never came under any scrutiny. Dr. Richard E. Bright, a molecular biologist from Rutgers, described this research in Wuhan as the Wuhan lab used NIH funding to construct novel chimeric SARS-related coronaviruses able to infect human cells and laboratory animals. This is high-risk research that creates new potential pandemic pathogens that exist only in the lab, not in nature. This research matches, these are Dr. E. Bright's words, this research matches, indeed epitomizes, the definition of gain-of-function research done entirely in Wuhan, for which there was supposed to be a federal pause. Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied.
The question is pretty simple right there. Okay, so the question is, it's pretty obvious that we did actually fund the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that we said don't engage in gain-of-function research, but that We gamed our own definition of gain of function research. And so what you're about to hear Fauci respond is sort of the Bill Clinton, it depends on the definition of the word is, defense. Now, from a legal perspective, he may be right? It may be why he is going to avoid any sort of criminal liability, for example, because gain of function research can be defined in a couple of different ways. On the one hand, you can define gain of function research as taking animal viruses and mixing them with other viruses in order to create human pathogens. But there's a definition of gain of function research that says really only human viruses that are made more deadly or more transmissible, only that is gain of function research. So that's the game that we're now going to play. It's a semantic game, but the underlying facts are really not in dispute. Josh Rogan, who is a columnist for the Washington Post, says, Rand Paul is right. The NIH was funding gain of function research in Wuhan, but the NIH pretended it didn't meet their gain of function definition to avoid their own oversight mechanism. So here you're going to hear Fauci get very angry and play word games. Here he goes.
Microphone.
Your microphone.
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function.
So
let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans.
Right.
You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. Okay, you get one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among mammals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's send Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2. That's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well,
we don't
wait
know
a minute.
If it did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator, because if you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, it is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It
no
is
one is alleging that
molecularly.
those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain of function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That is
you can't
not.
Get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth.
Senator
You are the
Paul's
one.
time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible
No one's
to
saying
result
they are. No
in
one's saying those viruses
SARS-CoV-2.
caused the pandemic.
Senator Paul,
We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were
They're not.
animal viruses that became more transmissible in human, and you funded it.
And you
admit the truth.
And you
Senator
implying.
Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individual. I totally resent
could
that.
have been.
And if anybody
And it
is
could have been.
lying here, Senator, it is you.
Okay, so what are they actually fighting about? What they're actually fighting about is definitions and fungibility of money. So what is gain of function research? Rand Paul is saying gain of function research is you take an animal virus, you make it transmissible to humans, that's gain of function. Fauci is saying, legally speaking, really it's only if you take a human virus and make it more transmissible or more deadly, that's gain of function. That's a stupid semantic game. What we care about is whether the United States was in fact funding development of viruses from animals to humans that could have been transmissible and deadly to other humans, right? Whether you call that gain of function, whether you don't call that gain of function, that is a bad thing for the United States to be doing, especially at an institute where there had been repeated reports of lab leaks, at an institute where the safety concerns were serious, and under the auspices of a government that is fascistic and communist in nature. Okay, that's question number one. Question number two is that the paper that Rand Paul is citing to talk about how they have been using animal viruses in order to make them transmissible to humans, that paper uses a specific subset of viruses that it's investigating. And Fauci is saying those viruses in that paper are not COVID-19. The viruses in that paper are molecularly impossible to be COVID-19. And Paul is saying, I'm not saying that the ones in this paper are COVID-19. I am saying this type of research could have created COVID-19, and that could have leaked, and we shouldn't have been funding this institute in the first place. Paul has the better of this argument. He does. That doesn't mean that legal liability is going to be attaching to Anthony Fauci, or that Anthony Fauci is guilty of some sort of perjury, because perjury requires an intent to lie, and it also requires that you be legally untrue, and that's arguable. And again, Fauci's sort of living in this gray space here. What it does mean is that the United States' complicity in working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology could create a significant level of moral culpability for the U.S. government. We should not be working with scientific institutions that run under the auspices of terroristic governments. And I'm sorry, the Chinese government is a terroristic government. It just took over Hong Kong and is currently arresting editorial members of Apple Daily right now. It is threatening Taiwan. It is threatening the globe in a wide variety of ways, ranging from internet surveillance to Belt and Road connections to funding of infiltrating groups in the West. You know, this is where Rand Paul is exactly right. And the fact that we aren't willing to look this in the face is pretty ugly. And what this really comes down to in the end is how we see China. And until the United States starts recognizing that China is an enemy, the Chinese government is an enemy, not the Chinese people. The Chinese people have been subjected to tyranny since the rise of Mao. The Chinese government is an enemy to the United States, and funding that enemy and interacting with the enemy of this governmental entity is an insane abdication of responsibility, and that is a bipartisan abdication of responsibility. It does not live in one party. I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you stay up to date with all our future content.